Hello there, lovely people. It's Alex from Nintendo Live here, and today we're reviewing for you Tetris Forever on the Nintendo Switch. This review was originally written by the superb Ollie Reynolds and has been adapted for video by me. But anyway, that's more than enough waffling. Let's dive right into things. How many times do you think we can say the word Tetris in a single review? Well, since Tetris Forever contains a total of 18 games based on the original 1985 title, you'd best strap yourselves in, because we're going to be saying it a lot. Well, alright, we might mix things up a bit with the odd sprinkling of Tetramino just to be nice, you lucky sausages. Anyway, Tetris. It's often been described as one of, if not the greatest game of all time, thanks to its unrivaled approachability and remarkable staying power. Yet we wouldn't be surprised if you perhaps weren't overly familiar with the game's origin, release, and subsequent proliferation across the video game industry. And that's where Tetris Forever comes in. Developed by Digital Eclipse, this marks the studio's third entry in its Gold Master series and takes a comprehensive dive into the creation of one of gaming's most iconic franchises. If you're familiar with the previous Gold Master releases, then you'll know what to expect with this one. It's jam-packed with interviews, images, documents, and archival material spread across 5 distinct timelines. Not only that, but as we mentioned earlier, Tetris Forever contains 18 playable games, from a recreation of the earliest version of Tetris on the Electronica 60 right up to Tetris Time Warp, a new spin on the classic gameplay that takes you on a journey throughout the franchise's history, built by Digital Eclipse specifically for this package. It's a generous release, and although the selection of games on offer is merely a fraction of the total catalogue of Tetris titles, the timelines more than make up for this with references to most major releases. Speaking of which, the timelines will prove particularly interesting for Nintendo fans. If you're even vaguely familiar with the history of Tetris, then you'll know that a big part of its success can be attributed to the pack-in version included with the Game Boy's Western release. Tetris Forever delves into this story in surprising depth, showcasing the crucial back-and-forth battle to obtain the relevant rights to the game, the visits and tours held within NCL's headquarters, and of course, a momentous meeting between Nintendo's president Hiroshi Yamauchi, Tetris creator Alexei Pajitnov, and licensing extraordinaire Henk Rogers. Pajitnov and Rogers are really the heart of Tetris Forever. It's their collaboration, friendship, and stewardship of the Tetris brand that drives the narrative featured within the 5 timelines. Pajitnov's original creation of the game is of particular interest, beginning with his love for the Pentamino toys, in which you try to fit a selection of Trominos, Tetraminos, and Pentaminos into a box. By taking this concept, focusing on the Tetraminos specifically, and applying it to a video game, Tetris was eventually born. We're then taken on a journey that covers the initial release of Tetris, publisher Tengen's failed attempt at re-engineering Nintendo's NES version, and the many sequels and spin-offs that would follow, and the eventual formation of Tetris Incorporated and its work with the recent Tetris movie. It's comprehensive stuff, and if you're a particular fan of the videos contained within Digital Eclipse's Gold Master series, you'll be in heaven with this one. There's so many of them, and it's a joy to watch Pajitnov and Rogers deliver such incredible passion for their work on the franchise. As for the playable games, Tetris Forever understandably shies away from its titles released in the 2000s and beyond, which is largely when firms like Ubisoft, Sega, THQ, and EA began to dip their little toes into the series. Instead, it focuses mainly on the various early variants of the main game, alongside some of the lesser-known direct sequels. Remarkably, to start with, Digital Eclipse has actually recreated the original Electronica 60 version of Tetris that Pajitnov made, which boasts both Russian and English version green and white color palettes, and a fantastic Electronica 60 themed border. We've then got versions of the game from the MS-DOS, Apple II, and Famicom, before launching into sequels such as Hatris, Tetris 2 Plus Bombliss, the Japan-exclusive Tetris Battle Gaiden, and Super Bombliss DX. Now, you've got to understand that the differences between many of these versions are negligible at times, but it's still great to see how the original publisher Bulletproof Software looked to evolve the Tetris idea and introduce variety for players as the years went by. Some minor issues do crop up, however. The first is that the control guides for some of the games are just wrong. For example, in the original Electronica 60 version, the controls state that A is used to rotate the Tetraminos. but it's actually B. It's a small mistake and one that we're certain will be fixed with a patch, but it's still worth highlighting. The other issue, and this is a minor temporary gripe, is that the controls aren't standardized by default across the games. Might not seem like a big deal, but if you're jumping from one to the other, you'll need to make sure that you either adapt to the new controls or configure the button functionality for each title for the most seamless experience. Totally fixable on the user end, but still a bit of a nuisance. In contrast, one of the highlights of the entire collection is the new bespoke title, Tetris Time Warp. This provides a great way to experience different variations on the classic Tetris gameplay, whilst also mixing up the visuals. The premise is fairly straightforward. You clear lines of blocks as per the norm, but occasionally a special Tetramino will drop down, and once you clear this, you'll be warped back to another version of Tetris for a limited amount of time. For instance, it might transport you back to the quote-unquote 1989 version, which is essentially the Game Boy version minus the official branding, in which you're tasked with clearing a double line within mere seconds. Or perhaps you'll be sent to a bombless level where you have to detonate a large bomb. Successfully completing one of these challenges sends you straight through to another time period, allowing you to quickly bump up your score should you successfully complete several in one go. There are also some neat variations on Time Warp if you're after a more traditional experience. You can set it to Marathon mode, where you simply play a standard game of Tetris without any Time Warp features, or 1989 Marathon, which is the same, but with those sweet Game Boy aesthetics. Finally, multiplayer is also available, and it takes the basic gameplay from Time Warp, but allows each player to effectively weaponize different time periods, forcing opponents to take on new challenges while you continue to clear lines on the main screen. It's great fun. Tetris Forever might not be the final word on the complete history of Tetris, but it's certainly the best breakdown of the franchise's creation and evolution so far. Digital Eclipse has truly mastered the art of the interactive documentary, and this one is absolutely filled to the brim with interesting videos, interviews, and archival material. The playable games don't necessarily represent the most varied selection across the Tetris franchise, but it's a comprehensive bunch of titles nonetheless, and Newcomer Tetris Time Warp is a fantastic new addition to a back catalogue that seemingly just won't stop growing. Tetris Forever, you're getting an 8 out of 10 from us. You've reached the end of the review. That means it's time for Alex's personal thoughts, and I think it's been summed up fairly well by Ollie. I think the only major gripe I have that Ollie didn't, well, Ollie did talk about it, but it's something I want to talk about further, is the selection of games. I understand why they are as limited as they are, but when you've got so many different subtle variations and yet huge omissions like the Nintendo-released games, I understand why they're not here, but it would have been nice to have them included to make it really feel much more sort of complete. I did get a little bit excited when the third game I played was just Go, and then it turned out that that was the only non-Tetris game in the collection. I mean, I suppose you could argue something like Hatris isn't Tetris, but you know what I mean. I was hoping to see maybe some more games that influenced or earlier games from the likes of Bulletproof Software or something like that that showed their journey in a little bit more detail, but at the same time, I can understand how if you have too many of that, it distracts from the whole point that this is a Tetris game. The real value for me in this, and I think for most people who are interested in this game, isn't necessarily the older games, although it is nice to be able to just dip in and sort of see things for how they actually were. It's the documentary. This is a Digital Eclipse game. It's an interactive documentary, and that is where it shines the strongest. One thing that I did notice is that certain clips seem to have some sort of minor corruption. It looks like something to do with the keyframes, if I were to go out on a limb, but it results in this sort of strange distortion, which was a little bit distracting, and I can only imagine it is on the footage and is kind of like already baked in, they couldn't get around it, in which case, that's fine. But if it wasn't on the original footage and it's just an error in encoding, that would be quite disappointing. But again, I don't know that fact, but it was a little bit jarring, I can't deny. But again, to reiterate, if it was on the original, that's all they had to work with. You can't complain. Stuff like this just degrades over time. But as a package, this thing's great. There's so much variety. I've never played Hatris before, and it turns out to be marginally better than I thought. For a long time, I just thought it was a Mario and Yoshi type game, and, well, it is in certain ways, but it's also a little bit more nuanced than that. You've got, like, the different heights of hats to take into consideration, and if you choose one of the shops, oh, it can get very hard indeed. I like this collection. I like it a lot. It's a good